But it's right at this moment that the crisis reaches its pitch. So thirdly, we consider the height of crisis, verse 35 of Mark 5. Because it's right then that a man from Jairus' house approaches him and says, "Your daughter is dead. Your daughter is dead." And in order to understand what God is doing here, we need to understand how crushing of a blow Jairus has just received here. Luke informs us, Luke 8:42, that this was his only daughter. His only daughter is now dead. That little girl that had been the object of his affection, the source of his joys, the one who made him laugh, the one who made him cry, the one who had been keeping him up over the last several nights or weeks even to care for her through her illness, is now dead. And his friends, so to speak, just bluntly tell him, your daughter's dead. Stop bothering the teacher. What a blunt shock. In fact, it's this shock is even further heightened by the fact that what Jairus had just experienced, we called an encouraging interlude. Right? He's just seen Jesus heal a woman. He's maybe never seen Jesus heal anybody before. And Jesus has just pronounced, "Woman, go, your faith has made you well." And right at that moment, when somebody else is made well, he learns that his daughter is dead. And what a trauma. He's devastated. His only daughter is dead. The bottom has just fallen out of his world. And listen to what the men are saying, really. When men come to him and say, or the man or whoever it was comes to Jairus, they're saying essentially, this problem has now become too big for Jesus. Right? The problem has now become too big for Jesus. Maybe he could have healed your daughter when she was ill. But now just stop bothering him because he can't raise the dead. Right? This problem is out of Jesus' hands. But you see, that's exactly the sentiment of unbelief. Unbelief says, my problems are too big for God to handle. My problems are too big for God to handle. Sometimes we say it differently. Many of us probably wouldn't say it just like that. But we say to one another or think to one another, he doesn't really understand my problems. Right? Nobody's really experienced this before. And this is something that we've probably all experienced at one point in time. Nobody understands what I'm going through and nobody can address my problems. That's what these men are saying to Jairus. Jesus can't address these problems. But faith says that there is no problem that is beyond the ability of Jesus to handle. So all of us will despair at one point or another, but faith says, cast your cares on Christ because He cares for us and He's able to handle all of our problems. So this crisis has reached a pitch. Jairus has lost his world. You know how it feels when you have a loss like that. I remember thinking when my grandmother died in 1997, I distinctly remember saying to an aunt of mine, what are we going to do now? As if like our lives were over. And of course life does go on. Thankfully God's grace is restorative in that way. But you understand how he felt. How am I going to go on? My life is over. Well, it's right at this point that Jesus begins to work resolution. And he does so by speaking directly to Jairus. And so, fourthly, we see what we could call a joyful resolution. And this last section of Mark chapter 5 is characterized by three different interactions that Jesus has. He interacts with Jairus, he interacts later with the mourners, and he interacts thirdly with the little girl herself. So we're going to look at each of those three interactions in terms of a resolution. First of all, between Jesus and Jairus. Jesus look at verse 36. 35. Right while Jesus was speaking, some men came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." So Jesus says right to Jairus, as Jairus is just experiencing this crushing blow, "Don't be afraid, only believe." Wow. What's Jesus saying there? Believe what? What is Jairus supposed to believe at this point? Now, it might be tempting for us to say, well, Jairus was obviously supposed to believe that Jesus could raise his daughter from the dead. Right? After all, it happens just a few verses later. We know it happens. So that's probably what Jesus was telling. Just believe that I'm going to go right to your house in a few minutes and raise your daughter from the dead. But why would we think that? Why would Jairus think that? Has Jairus ever experienced a resurrection from the dead? Put yourself in that position as a father who's just experienced the death of a daughter. And if Jesus were to come to you and say, "Don't fear, only believe," is Jesus telling him to believe that he's about to go heal her? Is that what Jesus would say to us today? Because lots of fathers have lost their daughters. And Jesus says the same thing to them. Don't fear, only believe. And yet most other fathers have never seen their daughter come back to life. What's Jesus saying? He's saying, believe in me. And you see, that's the glory of the Christian message. That at this moment, when Jairus' world has, at least as far as he can tell, disintegrated, Jesus says, trust in me. Believe in me. You see, God is worth holding on to even when the bottom falls out of our world. When everything seems to be against us, when God's own hands seem to be against us. After all, this girl didn't die apart from the decree of God. And yet Jesus says, don't be afraid, but believe. Trust in me. Cling to me, because I am good enough for you even in the midst of this tragedy. And you see, that's the Christian message. And that's the joy of it, because God doesn't promise that everything in our lives is going to be made better as we trust in Him. And that's the problem with the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel, so-called. That if you believe in Jesus, everything's going to be made better. No, this man's world was devastated. And yet Christ says, hold on to me. Trust in me. Believe that He who takes away is also the one who gave in the first place, as Job says. Believe that He who allows hurt is also the one who heals. Believe that God uses pain and trial and loss to steer the Christian to heaven. Don't be afraid. Only believe.